Hey, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at theserverside.com, and I want to quickly show you how to get started with Hibernate and JPA. Now, I'm starting off with a blank vanilla operating system. I don't have a database. I don't have an IDE. All I've got is Notepad++, but that's not going to cut it. If you want to do some Hibernate and JPA, you're going to need to install the JDK. So I've headed over here to jdk.java.net/21 to download a zip file that has all of the Java JDK 21 goodness in it. So click zip, download the JDK. Now you can see I've actually already downloaded it just to save you the weight of downloads. After that's downloaded, head over to eclipse.org/IDE. You need an IDE. I don't care which one you use. I like Eclipse. I'm heading over here. I'm going to click on an orange download button to download it. But oh, it's a little sleight of hand. There, you got to click on another orange download button. There we go. That should download it. Oh no, there's another orange download button. Will this do it? Boom. Yes, it will. That will download the Eclipse IDE. Now I'm going to cancel that download because as you can see in the downloads folder, I've already downloaded it just to save you some time. But as that's downloading, here's the next thing in this three-horse race that we need. We need to download MySQL or a database. Any JDBC database is good. Now, the free download of the open source MySQL is kind of hidden here on the downloads page. You got to go right to the bottom, find the MySQL community downloads, click on that, and that should download it. But no, misdirection. There we go. You got to click on MySQL installer for Windows. That should download it. No, misdirection again. We now have to click on the download button for the 428 meg file. And then we've got to log in. Actually, misdirection. No, we don't. You can actually just say, no thanks. Just start my download. I don't want you to get my credentials. And that will download the MySQL database. Now I'm going to cancel that download because I've already got it downloaded. Now we have to install. So starting off with the JDK, just right click on your JDK download and say extract here, 7-zip extract here. You'll see it creates a folder called JDK-21. There you go. It's time for some blackjack. Just copy that folder into, I don't know, some good place on your file system. I like _tools. Myself, that puts the JDK in that _tools folder. Now when we're done that, we probably want to configure Java Home. So go in and edit your system environment variables. Type system in that window. Click on the edit the system environment variables link. Click on environment variables and then add a new variable named Java Home, _home. Make sure it's pronounced uppercase letters in Java Home. And it should just point to the installation folder. So _tools/JDK21. That's good. Once we're done there, we probably want to add the bin directory to the path as well. So put the install folder /bin. Don't forget that /bin. Add that to the path and boom, all of a sudden we now have the JDK installed. Don't believe me? Are you from Missouri? Well, just go java-version and there you go. It says Java 21 is installed. That's how easy it is to install the JDK. Now, is it just as easy to install the Eclipse IDE? Let's find out. So go back to that downloads folder, double click on the Eclipse installer. All of a sudden, the Eclipse installer will come up and I'll probably ask you a few questions. What flavor of Eclipse do you want? We want the enterprise Java and web developers flavor. It should find the JDK installation. There it does. What's the installation folder? As I said, I like to put everything in that _tools folder. So I'll change the installation folder to _tools, J2EE, let it install, click launch, sped things up a bit there just because it got a little bit boring. I'm going to set the workspace to be _tools and then click launch and boom, all of a sudden the Eclipse IDE 2023-03, the March 2023 release starts up. Now we should get it to open and go to a nag screen. I'm going to just close that nag screen and then see Eclipse all in its Eclipse goodness. There we go. Click on the nag screen just to kill it. Maximize the window. And I think we're good. We've got Eclipse installed. So what is next? The next thing we need to install is our database. You can't do database persistence without a database. So double click on the MySQL installer. This is going to ask you a million questions for some credentials for the TCP/IP port. I'm going to do a custom install. The reason I'm doing a custom install is I don't want the Python connector in there just because I don't have Python installed. So do a custom install, remove Python as a JDBC connector, then click Next after the components get installed. Click Next on product configuration. Notice that port 3306 is where we're going to be hosting our database. That'll come in handy later. Click Next on the authentication mechanism. Put in your password for the root account. I'm just going to use password and password. Don't suggest you do that in production, but that'll keep life easier for us in development. Okay, once you've done that, click Next. Now configure MySQL Star as a Windows service. Click Next. Make sure you've got file permissions. Click Next. Apply the configuration. Click Execute. Click Finish. Then click Next again. Then click Next again. Then put in your password to test the installation. Checks out. Click Next again. Execute another configuration script. Then click Finish, but oh boy, are you really finished? No, we've got another configuration to do, so click Next, and then click Finish, and then all of a sudden, it looks like we're installed. A MySQL shell will open up, the MySQL workbench will open up, double-click on your instance, put in your password, which was password, click OK, and then this is going to open up the workbench. We want to click on that Schemas tab, right-click on the empty space in the list of schemas and create your own database schema, your own database. That's what we're going to connect to. Select Create Schema, and then type in Hibernate _examples, and that will essentially create the database location that we're going to connect to. Click Apply again, and we will soon populate Hibernate examples with some of our own tables, columns, and most importantly, data. Data persistence is what this is all about. Okay, so that is the foundation. We've got Java installed, we've got Eclipse installed, we've got our database installed. I just do a little cleanup here, close a couple of windows, and then open up the Eclipse IDE, and boom, now we're ready for development. So with everything installed, the next step is to just go in and create a new project in Eclipse. I'm going to create a Maven project. I'm going to skip the archetype selection and just go in and create a new project with a group ID of com.mcnz.jpa. I'll give the artifact ID the name examples. Click Finish. This now creates my project. And once this is created, there's a couple of files that we need to reference in our POM file. So I'm going to come over here, open up examples, open up the POM file, and you can see right here, well, there's not too much in our POM file right now. There's a couple of things we need to do. First of all, we need to tell our Maven environment that we're using Java 17, otherwise it defaults to Java 5. Now, the other thing we need to do is we need to add some dependencies. Let me spell that correctly. And the two dependencies that we need are, well, the first one is on Hibernate. Right? We want to use Hibernate. So let's go over here and open up Chrome, open up Maven Central. Hopefully this will point us to the Hibernate binaries. There it is, right there. I'm going to take that set of coordinates for the Hibernate core libraries and paste those in as a list of dependencies. Yeah, that looks pretty messy there, but I'll format this in just a minute. The other thing we need to do is make sure that we have the core libraries for the driver for MySQL. And there we go, MySQL connector J libraries 8.033. That's going to work for me. I'm going to copy those coordinates, paste those into the POM file as well. Click Control S to save. I'm also going to format this file a little bit because it doesn't look handsome. I'm going to save. I'm going to increase the size. And then I'm going to notice there's actually something that I don't like here. I'm going to change this from type POM. I'm going to get rid of type POM. And I'm going to add a scope in here. And the scope that I'm going to add, oh boy, that's a mess. The scope that I'm going to add here is say that I need these libraries at compile time. If you don't have them at compile times, you'll get an error when you start to run the project. So got rid of the type equals pom, added in scope compile, click Control S to save, and then it's always a good idea after you have played around with Maven to update your project. You'll see that Maven just starts updating. You can see that in the little corner right there. And I also like to do a build. Just do a run as Maven install. That just makes sure that all of the libraries that it references get installed in your M2 folder under your local user in your operating system. It's also nice to see build success, knowing that we've configured Maven and there isn't a problem. So one last look at that Maven file. There you see it right there. I'm going to close it up and move on to the next step, which is creating a persistence.xml file in a folder named meta-inf under your resources folder. So you have to create a folder called meta-inf. You may not have noticed the inflection in my voice, but I created that with all uppercase letters, said that with all uppercase letters, and you need a file in here named persistence.xml. You have to spell it correctly. Can't be any funny naming, can't be uppercase, can't be lowercase, has to be persistence.xml. And now at this point in time, you want to find a good persistence.xml file and just paste it in there because, well, you're not going to be able to type in the XSI and the XML namespace without messing something up. So just paste it in there. A couple of things to note. I've pasted in a persistence.xml file that works with MySQL. You can see that MySQL driver has been configured. You can see that the database that it's running on, 3306, that's my local port. Also, notice the name of the database and the database URL, Hibernate examples, plural. If I go down to MySQL, you'll notice that the schema there, the database, is named Hibernate examples. Those have to match. Also, I put in the username and password, root and password. And I've also got this database action here. Now, you don't want this in a production system, but this is actually going to tell the JPA environment to look at the different Java classes that I have, drop any database that currently exists, drop any table that currently exists, and then create new tables based on my entities, based on my Java classes. So that's what we need to do next. We need to actually go in and create a Java class. So I'm going to create a new class called player. I'm going to go into this examples, new main Java folder. I'm going to create a new class. I will call this class player. I'll put this in com.mcnz.jpa.examples. Why not? And I'm going to click finish here. And this is a Java component that I want to persist to my database. I eventually want to have a table under here that's called player to hold all of my player data. Now, a couple of things I need to do. First thing I need to do is add an entity annotation there. I'm going to click Control S. It's going to give me a little problem here, but I can click on that, maybe hover around. It says, do you want to import entity from Jakarta persistence? And of course I do. I'm going to throw the wildcard in there instead of just importing entity, because I'm going to need a bunch of things from that Jakarta persistence package. Now, what else do I need? Well, if you're going to be persisting to a database, you need an ID. So I'm going to create a private long ID. That's the property that's going to represent the ID. And I have to tell JPA about it. I have to say this is going to be the primary key, unique identifier when we go to the database. So you throw an ID annotation on there. Also, we're going to ask MySQL to generate a value for us when we persist something to the database. You say, you add that on there. You say, hey, I want to have a generated value. And then you can have properties. So I'll have a private property of type string that I guess my player will have a name. And then what else? Private string. Maybe my player will have a password. Who knows? Do something like that. And then, well, it's always a good idea to generate your setters and getters. So I will do that requirement right there. Click generate and boom, we get all of that verbosity that we don't particularly love in Java. But there you go. You can see the whole Java class file right there. It looks pretty handsome. An ID, a name, and a password. So it's fairly complicated. And I guess the next thing we want to do is actually just create a class that could maybe create a player and persistent to the database. I'm just going to create a new class called JPA Runner. And I'm going to throw in a main method here just so that it's runnable, just so that it's executable, just so that I can get it to do something. And what am I going to get it to do? Well, right now, all I want to do is actually just see if my environment works. So I'm just going to do this. Play around. I'm going to say, hey, JPA, get me Entity Manager. And I'm going to get the Entity Manager from the Entity Manager factory. Where else would you get it? I'll call it EMF. And then equals, oh, you have to do this, persistence.create Entity Manager factory. And, oh, what do you have to provide in here? You have to provide the name of the persistence unit. And what's the name of my persistence unit? Don't type it in. What you got to do is go over to your persistence.xml file and copy it from here, because if you don't get this right, nothing is going to work. You'll notice that my persistence unit is named JPA tutorial. When you create the entity manager, you type in that name, JPA tutorial. The two have to match. That creates the entity manager factory that I can use to get an entity manager out of it. I'm going to do that next line of code, even though I've got a little error there. Entity manager equals EMF. That's the factory.create entity manager. That creates my entity manager. There we go. And I do think I've got a little error here. It says, hey, we can't resolve that. So I'm going to click Control-Shift-O. And when I click Control-Shift-O, well, it adds in all of these persistent imports for me. So I'm going to click Save, click Control-S. And you know what? I can actually run this right now. Now, you might think it's not going to do anything, but it's actually going to prove that things work. Notice under tables here, under Hibernate examples, nothing is listed. Okay, watch this. I've actually told Hibernate, I've told JPA that whenever you create an entity manager, drop any databases that exist and create a new one for yourself. So I'm going to come over here and say run as a Java application. It's going to look like it doesn't do anything. It's got a little console window there that is printing out a bunch of messages. There's no errors, even though it does look punitive with all of that red ink. Boy, did it do anything? Didn't look like it did anything. I'm going to come over here. Going to click refresh all on this table, and boom, all of a sudden we've actually got two tables here. We've got the player sequence that will be used to help create unique IDs for players that are created, and then we've got a player table with columns. What do you think the columns are? Oh, let me guess. Could it be name, password, and ID? Boom, all of a sudden name, password, and ID. Now there's nothing in here. If I say, hey, select all the rows, it's going to say, oh, there's nothing in there. And that makes sense because I haven't persisted anything in there. But let's shake things up. Let's go persist something in here. How would you do it? So, well, all I have to do is create a player. Player P equals new player. That creates a blank player with nothing in it. I can say p.set password. And I'll put a password in there. My password. That works. And then finally, after that, what else? What other field do we need? P.set name. So we'll set the name to Julie. Why not? There we go. The Julie name is added. You gotta. Why am I getting all of these S's here? It's because I keep clicking Control S to save, but I'm not hitting Control hard enough. Okay, that creates a player. Notice the ID is not set. The ID will be set by the tool, by JPA, by Hibernate. Now that just creates a player. You have to touch this entity manager for the entity manager to take control of it. So I'll say entity manager.persist. Persist P, that player, right? The player is just named P right there. Not a great naming convention. And then entity manager.getTransaction.commit, right? You want to actually not just touch the entity manager, but you actually want to persist what is in there. Now that all looks good. I've created a player object. I've touched the entity manager with the player object using the persist command. And then I say, hey, actually commit anything that you're working with. Click Control S. I'm going to right click and say run as a Java application. Oh, everything looks good, even though, once again, it is that red punitive ink. Oh, it looks like the entity manager transaction wasn't started. I did forget to start it. I've committed it over here. I haven't started it. So let's start it. Let's go entity manager.get transaction .begin. That's begin, and you got to spell it right. I'm typing so quickly here. There we go. We start the transaction. That's a good thing to do before you end the transaction. Then down here, we commit the transaction. Inside starting and ending the transaction, our entity manager has touched that persistence unit. Let's run it now. Run as a Java application. That red ink comes up, but nothing punitive here. It all looks good. Now I'm going to come over to MySQL. Nothing's there. Why is that? Oh, it's because I haven't done a query. Let's select the query and boom, Julie and my password is right in there, which maps right back to Julie and my password right here. Now, a couple of things just to point out in case you had a problem there. This persistent unit there, JPA tutorial, that has to match exactly to the persistence unit right here in the XML file, JPA tutorial. Furthermore, Hibernate examples right there has to match the schema name or the database name in your database. There you see Hibernate examples right there. And then finally, when you're working with your POM file, let's take a look at that POM. You may have troubles if you don't change the scope of those Hibernate files. The default may leave you hanging, and you may end up getting an error saying that the persistence file can't be read or won't work properly. It's a cryptic error message, so just be careful with that. Also, anytime I run this application again, let me change the password to my password X and run this application. So run it as a Java application. It goes, it runs, it executes. I come over here to MySQL. I do a query, select rows, and boom, my password X is there. But what happened to the other record that was added earlier? Well, remember, right now, I have this setting over here in the persistence.xml file that says, hey, drop and create every single time you run. If I get rid of that, come over here and then run the application one more time and maybe change the username to Joe this time. Run as a Java application. Well, what do you think is going to happen now? I'm going to mosey on over to my database. I'm going to right click on player, select rows, and boom, all of a sudden you now see Joe, right? So if you've got drop and create configured in your persistence.xml file, every time you do some work, well, it's going to drop the database. So that's not a bad thing to have as you're adding new classes, adding new persistence units, adding new relationships between persistence units. You want to have your database recreated to support it, but probably not something you want to do in production. And it may just catch you a little bit off guard when you're doing development. But otherwise, that's how easy it is to create a simple Hibernate and JPA application that will connect to a database. In this case, we are connecting to MySQL and simply persist data against that database when you run your Java program. Now, if you enjoyed that tutorial, why don't you head over to the serverside.com. We got lots of more great Hibernate and JPA tutorials over there. If you're interested in my personal antics, you can always follow me on Twitter. And please, why don't you subscribe on the YouTube?